Hi, everyone, and welcome to Jehovah Boy. I'm your host, Doug Smith, and this is my podcast all about struggles, hardship, trauma, bad shit, overcoming it, channeling it into your creativity without letting it define you. I talk to friends, comics, artists of all ilks. My guest today is comedian, actor, podcaster, improviser, Chris Gethard. We have a great talk. I've known Chris a long time. We go way back. We have a great talk about mental health, the current comedy climate, and fatherhood. A lot of talk about fatherhood. I have a 7-year-old son. He's a 3.5-year-old son. We trade war stories. Speaking of which, I did not sleep very well last night for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, I am a bed sweater. Never been a bedwetter. Huge bed sweater. It's always the same thing, too. I get cold at night, and I climb into bed with sweatpants, a hoodie, socks. I sleep under a down comforter with a quilt on top of that. And then I wonder why I am a human incinerator. I'm like one of those homeless dudes that wears 6 down parkas in the dead of August. But I never realized this right away. I always think I'm dying. I think, oh my God, I'm going to WebMD, bed sweating, and find out that my body is turned against me. I'm slowly dying, and this is the beginning of the end. But then takes me a minute. I wake up in a puddle, cold sweat. I shed a couple layers, and I'm like, oh, that was it. Simple solution. But I still never really get a great night's sleep because I share a bed with my 7-year-old son. Sleep train your babies, folks. You got to do it. You got to sleep train your babies. We tried. We failed. We were not committed. We lost the battle to a baby. He prevailed. You got to be consistent. You got to be determined. Yeah, they're going to hate you. They're going to scream their guts out. You're going to have to close the door, lock it. They're going to be pounding on the door, cursing you to the heavens. But you got to ignore their cries. You got to become a cold-hearted monster to ensure proper sleep habits so that they can sleep in their bed and you can share a bed with your partner. I have not shared a bed with my partner in years. She sleeps in his room, in his bed, a twin-size bed. I sleep in the marital bed. It's not even a queen-size bed. I'm a grown man sharing a full-size bed with a 7-year-old boy. I used to sleep in his bed. It used to be opposite situation. It used to be my wife slept in bed with him. I slept in his room. But my spine is dog shit. I can't handle his soft-ass mattress. So this is the current scenario. And it sucks. I miss sharing a bed with my wife. You guys are probably thinking, how do you find time to be intimate? Well, I put him to bed, and then I sneak off, and I go have a rendezvous with my wife in his bed. And don't judge, because it's not even his bed. He's never slept in it once. Does it feel weird having sex in animal print sheets? Sure. Does it feel even weirder to achieve orgasm while staring a Captain Underpants poster dead in the eyes? You bet your ass it does, but them's the breaks. This is the hand we've been dealt with. Oh boy. I'm a cautionary tale. Sleep train your babies. You got to do it, or this will be your fate. One of my friends is blown away by this idea. He's like, you're sharing a bed with your 7-year-old. When are you going to kick him out? When his morning wood hits you in the back? I don't know. My morning wood hit him in the back once. That was pretty uncomfortable. He rolls over in the middle of the night. Dad, move your elbow. I was like, oh, what? Move? Oh, yeah, my elbow. Sorry. Anyway, Chris Gethard is my guest today, like I said. And I've known Chris for about 15 years. I moved to New York in 2005 to pursue a stand-up career. Only 2 years removed from the Jehovah's Witness organization. And I got to the greatest city in the world, with all the wonderful temptations of Babylon the Great that I was dissuaded from my entire upbringing and adolescence. All the evils of Satan's world were right within reach, tangible. Sex, drugs, mayhem, right there. So I thought, you know what? Fuck my career aspirations. I'm going to be an alcoholic whore. That's exactly what I did. I got kicked out of every bar on St. Mark's Place within 6 months of moving here. Had a bunch of drunken one-night stands, and I'm lucky to be alive. Also lucky that I was working for a dog walking service at the time. I found the one job where you could be a functioning alcoholic without getting fired. I showed up so many mornings, hammered. Dogs don't care. I was such an alcoholic, I didn't even get hungover. I would just get delirium tremors every day at 5 o'clock. Just get the shakes until I came home and polished off a 6-pack of PBR. And I moved here with no money. I had to work my way up to a 6-pack of PBR. I started out drinking 40s of Colt 45. I had to work my way up to the good stuff. So yeah, my first year here was basically my Rumspringa, making up for lost time. Going balls to the wall. And I got some tomfoolery out of my system, and I thought, all right, I did move here to pursue a comedy career, but I still could not take the plunge with stand-up, so I started taking improv classes at Upright Citizens Brigade. And Chris Gethard was one of my teachers, level 4. He was my level 4 teacher, and I had seen Chris doing improv a number of times, and he was a prodigy in the UCB community. He was younger than everybody else, and he was a whiz kid. He was an amazing improviser. Turns out he was an amazing teacher, too. I took 2 classes with him. I was not a consistent improviser at all, but all my best work was done in his class. Because it can be humiliating. You don't know what's going to happen. You have zero control. You might get called upon to be a dog or a baby. It's fucking humiliating. My best work, anytime there was a scene that called for a dead body, man, that was me. I would fling myself on the ground, and I nailed it, man. Just lie there. Lifeless corpse. That was my best work. I was the go-to corpse in every scene that called for it. And I know stand-ups and improv, there's a bit of a feud between stand-ups and improv. I don't feel like improv shit up on stand-ups. Stand-ups love to shit on improv. And honestly, I don't think there's anything more impressive than good improv. Bad improv is, brutal. Tough to watch. I don't think there's anything worse. But good improv, I don't think there's anything better, honestly. The fact that Middleditch and Schwartz can sell out theaters, pulling shit out of their ass, blows my mind. I can't believe it. That they have thousands of people buying tickets to see them, having no idea what's about to transpire on stage. I could not in a million years. I would shit my pants and cry. And who knows, that alone might be worth the price of admission for some people, to watch a grown man have a panic attack, shit his pants, and cry on stage. So, anyway, my conversation today is with Chris Gethard, and we talk about some bullying in the comedy community, because one of his specials, Career Suicide, it's on HBO. Check it out. It's fantastic. But it was not well received by all comics. He got some shit. He had some people talking shit about him on podcasts and various other platforms, and it really kind of was a kick in the nuts. It's tough to deal with that. People taking you down a peg, not to your face, but behind your back, shitting all over your work. And it was a hard time for him. We talk about that. I'm lucky. I don't think I've been subject to bullying in the comedy community. If I had, I don't know about it. I'm sure some people probably are not fans of what I do and talk shit behind my back, but hey, you ain't shit if you don't have haters, right? All my bullying is hopefully a thing of the past. I did receive some bullying over being a Jehovah's Witness. I tried to keep it close to the vest for as long as I could, but I was pretty much outed on my first day of kindergarten, because Jehovah's Witnesses do not believe in nationalism, so they do not salute the flag. So first day of kindergarten, everybody stands, places their hand over their heart for the Pledge of Allegiance. I'm just standing there with my arms folded, looking like the world's youngest anarchist. I was flipping the bird to the USA way before Colin Kaepernick. My teacher looked horrified. She was like, "Oh, what the hell is with little Che Guevara over here? Not even 5 minutes into day one, he's ready to burn the place down and start a revolution." So I immediately kind of stuck out like a sore thumb, but again, every year I tried to keep it close to the vest and not let anybody know. You don't want to be outed as some Bible thumping Christian dork. But it all kind of blew up in my face in 7th grade because, as you may know, I had to go door to door. Part of being a Jehovah's Witness is going door to door, spreading the good news of God's kingdom. And you get a territory map where you got to hit every house on that street. And one day, the route that we were assigned was my exact bus route. Every kid on the street went to my school. I was mortified. We pulled into this one driveway, and I knew the kid that lived there, and he was an asshole. And I told my mom, I was like, Mom, this kid Ian, he's such a prick. Please don't make me go to his door. Please let me skip this one. She was like, what are you ashamed of? You have an opportunity to save this boy. Tell him the good news about God's kingdom and a hope for the future. He could survive Armageddon, but it's up to you. You could save him. You could be his salvation. So I had to go to this kid's door, and he answered the door, and he looked flabbergasted. He was like, Doug, what are you doing here? And I gave him my whole spiel because my mom was standing right there, and he was trying not to laugh at me the whole time. And then for the rest of the year, he and everybody on my bus called me, title drop, Jehovah Boy. That was my nickname for the duration of 7th grade, Jehovah Boy. Which in retrospect, pretty badass superhero name, right? I am Jehovah Boy. I have the power to ruin your Saturday with a single ring of a doorbell. But at the time, I was humiliated. I wish I could do it all over again. Imagine if I rang his doorbell and he answered. He was like, Doug, what are you doing here? I was like, I'm required by law to inform you that I'm a registered sex offender. That's how humiliating it is to out yourself as Jehovah's Witness. I'd rather be a sex offender, because you know what? At least sex offenders are having fun. Anyway, enjoy my conversation with Chris Gethard. I want to start, if you don't mind, by reading this text that I got from you when booking you for this, because it was so funny. You mind? About what you might have... No, it's nothing incriminating. About what you might have to jump off to do.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to book you for this podcast, and you go, yo, I'm covering for another volunteer ambulance driver 1 to 4 on Thursday. Long story, this is not a bit. So if a call comes in after 1, I have to run. So we could either start a little earlier or just risk it.
Yeah, this is true. This is my life now, man. I moved out to the suburbs. I became a volunteer ambulance driver.
That's amazing. So you may have to jump off to save someone's life, or I don't know what you meant by risk it. Either risk abandoning the pod or risk whoever's depending on you to get to the hospital.
I meant risk abandoning someone who's having some sort of cardiac episode. And then all of us living with the responsibility. Definitely not putting down the mic and going to help them and abandoning the pod. Leaving the people of New Jersey under great duress. I moved out to the burbs, and I'm kind of, not even the burbs, like kind of the middle of nowhere, and I don't have anything to do. So it's a good activity to get me out of the house in my 40s. That's where I'm at. You remember I used to be like I was like hip stuff in the Brooklyn comedy world for a long time. And now this, driving an ambulance around Jersey.
This is what midlife crisis looks like now.
It's what it's all about. Just talking ambulances, drinking Airborne on a Thursday afternoon.
I thought you were doing the do. Nope, it's Airborne.
No, it's Airborne, man. It's Airborne.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, I did think when you told me that, I was like, oh, I did think this is another bit he's doing, because I know you love to put yourself in strange, challenging scenarios, right? This is something you love. I was just watching Half My Life, now on Amazon Prime, a couple nights ago, and the whole pancake breakfast show that you did.
That was a fun show.
They didn't have the electric circuitry necessary to cook the pancakes? There was enough pancakes for 4 people or something?
Yeah, the venue, we sold out that show. It was a small venue. I'm not bragging. And they were like, stay the next night. And I was like, I have another show. They were like, the pancake breakfast show. And I was like, great. And then it turned out they were completely incapable of fulfilling that. And it was almost a disaster. But I enjoy a good disaster. But yeah, I've been, Greg Stone, who is another comic who I'm buddies with. I was telling him last night, I was driving the ambulance, and he's like, you do this stuff to get material, right? And I'm like, no, I do this stuff and it does give me material, but I did not sign up for this with the intent of generating comedic content. I've legitimately now driven on, I think I'm up to 14 actual calls where I've driven a human in an ambulance to a hospital. Some of them have been crazy. Most of them are.
Has the outcome been good? Do you get updates on their progress, or is it just my job is to get you there and then out of sight, out of mind?
Yeah, out of sight, out of mind. But I'm lucky, and knock on wood that this continues. Thus far, I haven't driven anyone who's been under too much duress. I'm not allowed to say too much because of HIPAA laws, which is true. I was once driving someone who was in so much pain that they were given morphine while in the back of an ambulance I was driving, and that felt like a World War II movie. Like, when do you see someone get morphine, And there was another one where a person flipped a car, and that was pretty dicey, and the car was actually stolen. So there were a bunch of police in an ambulance, and he was handcuffed to a stretcher as I drove him to a hospital. And it's a wild gig. Most of them
just pull over, stop the car. He deserves to die.
I mean, it was the way. I have to keep my mouth shut on that. But I was not saying things like that. But I did hear a couple comments from that along those lines from some of maybe the more police involvement of people just being like, this guy. Like, I mean, this guy. It was hard to find sympathy for the person who stole a car and caused this issue, but I always am just psyched. I haven't seen any like blood, or I've seen a few tense things, but nothing too bad. Nothing too bad in my time as an ambulance driver.
Wow. So is this actually a means of wanting to help people, or just an excuse to blow through red lights?
It's I would say it's half and half, to be honest. It's like
it's gotta be pretty thrilling.
It's pretty cool to throw the siren on or blast the air horn, I had somebody, my most recent call, it was the morphine call, and I was pulling up to a red light, and this person pulled out of a parking spot and stopped in front of me and then was waiting at the red light. And the paramedic on board was like, do you have your lights on? And I'm like, yeah, some idiot's in front of me though, and just stopped at the light. And they're like, blast him with the horn. So it was just like, and feels pretty good. But most of it is it's a way to help people, and I know you can empathize with this as well, where I'm just like, I have a son, and we live in a world that just feels so harsh all the time, and where so many people feel like they're just like looking for ways to take each other down or look out for themselves. So there's definitely also part of me that's like, I think it's a cool example to set for my son of like, no, you're in a family where like every once in a while a pager goes off and your dad has to run out the door to help somebody. Like, I think that's a cool tone to set about how he needs to think of the world. So sorry for that completely schmaltzy answer.
No, are you kidding me? That you're absolutely right. He'll look back on that and be like, holy shit, yeah, my dad was a low-key badass. And also when he gets older, that's a hell of a way to get out of helping him with his homework too.
I mean, you have no idea. There's been times where I'm doing dishes and the pager goes off, and I'm like, I get a text message that says, there's like a whole app. So this pager, I can show you. This is the pager. So this explodes with sound. There's no way you're sleeping through this thing. Then there's also an app. So my phone starts making crazy noise too. They do everything they can to make sure you get woken up if you're asleep. And then the app gives you like the 911 dispatchers punching in what's going on. So it's usually right out of the gate, it's like a 1-sentence description. So there have been times where I'm doing dishes and it'll be like, oh, fuck yeah, someone's having a stroke. Let's go. I don't have to do dishes anymore. And then you catch yourself saying something like that and going like, oh, wait, it's about helping this other person. Let's chill out with that. Let's chill out a little bit with that.
I think I'm most blown away by the fact that you're living in the burbs. You own a house now. You have a yard too, right?
Yeah. I love my
and
yard.
you're all in the lawn care, right?
Yeah,
But you
big time.
still, and you are and your son is 3 now,
3.5. Yeah.
3.5, and you're still looking for shit to do in the middle of the day. Whereas I am I am scheduling naps at every turn still.
Right. And do you have 2 kids now or just one still?
Still just one. He's
And
7.
you're still getting away with naps? Or you're scheduling naps
Well,
for you?
me. Yeah,
Oh,
for me.
yeah.
For me.
Dude, my son is just at the point where he's like, I don't feel like taking a nap. And we can convince him most days, but he's like verbally telling us, I don't want to nap anymore. It's like, oh, I've heard these go away. I thought we'd get another year or so. That's going to be a bummer when he stops napping.
Oh, yeah. It's tough. I mean, I was wrestling my kid down for naps till he couldn't stand it anymore, just because I needed them, you know?
Yeah. There's
Under
been
the guise of he needs it, you know? You need your sleep, buddy. You need your sleep. I think one time I slipped up. I was like, I need some fucking sleep. He's like,
He, a few days ago, I was like cuddling him, trying to get him to fall asleep, and I fell asleep and woke up and he was not asleep. And I was like, this is a weird, I hope he doesn't remember this. The time my father cradled me and fell asleep while I awkwardly just looked at his face from 1.5 inches away.
Yeah, I know. I'm worried that my son's biggest memories of me are going to be like, I hit a wall at like 4 or 5 o'clock every day. And like, we'll be like, I'll finish helping him with his homework. We'll be playing some video games or something. And I'll be like, hey buddy, you mind if I just close my eyes for like 10 minutes? And he's like, yeah, no problem. And I'll just kind of like flop over on the couch, and then an hour later I wake up and he's just kind of sitting there watching, and I'm like, Jesus, this is not a good look.
See, the ambulance thing, I'm like, driving the ambulance, I feel a little cheesy doing it, but it's a better example to set for him than him like seeing me like, what comedians have talked shit about me, or like, what are people saying about me on Reddit, which is you know, a little bit more of who I used to be, of like, what did Chappelle say now? Like, there's all these aspects of our life where it's just like, ultimately, who cares? And I don't want him to see me caught up in that. I'd rather see him see me driving an ambulance around our small town. Maybe he thinks it's cool. He legit thinks it's cool, and I feel good about that.
Oh yeah, dude, they love that shit. I don't know if I told you this. When my son was 2.5, my wife had him at the park. I was packing up to go do a gig upstate. I got a phone call from her, and I immediately knew. You know, sometimes you get a call and just before you answer it, you know it's bad news. You just kind of have a premonition. And I just knew something was up. And she answers, and I answer the phone, and I hear him screaming in the background. And she goes, Doug, there's been an accident. Mason stabbed himself in the eye with a stick. I'm running to the hospital as we speak. Meet me there. And I was like, okay. And I chucked the phone across the room, and I just started sprinting to Methodist Hospital, which thankfully is like 10 blocks away from my apartment. But yeah, he was running down a hill with his friends. There was like a group of 3 of them. They were all playing with sticks. They all ran down this same hill. They all fell at the bottom of the hill, but he was the only one whose stick went in his eye.
Oh my goodness.
I sprint to the hospital, and I show up, and, you know, his eyes, I can't really see what's been done, you know, but there's blood and it's swollen. And they did not have a pediatric unit there that was capable of dealing with that sort of injury. So they had to send an ambulance from Columbia Presbyterian to Methodist Hospital in Park Slope. So you had to wait for like 40 minutes for this ambulance. And then we had to hop in. I was on a gurney with him on my lap, just hurtling up the West Side Highway, and he was having the fucking time of his life. You would never know that anything bad happened to him. He was like, this is awesome. We get to the hospital, like, all right, buddy, we got to get out. He's like, oh man, can't we stay in a little longer? And I was like, no, buddy, you need you need urgent care. He's like, can we do it again tomorrow? Like, it was one of the best days. He had an ambulance ride, and then he went home with an eye patch. He's fine, by the way. Like,
good. Everything turned out okay?
In
yes.
suspense here. Yeah.
Good.
But between the ambulance ride and the eye patch, it was one of the best moments of his life.
That's amazing. And how much did that cost you?
In terms of years off my life, probably 10.
Right. I mean, like when he's like, can we do that again tomorrow? And you're like, dude, if we didn't have insurance, that would have cost $40,000 that ambulance ride.
Exactly. Yeah. It's nuts.
I had one. My son has had stitches once, and I was out of town. And the really grim part is I was FaceTiming them to say goodnight. I was out of town working, and he got really excited, and he was trying to show off and like jump around. My wife was visiting some friends, and their house wasn't baby-proofed, and he started like jumping off of something, and I was just like, oh, and he just caught his head on the side of the table that the iPad was on. So I just saw my kid hurtling forward. I heard my wife screaming, and then he just popped up, and he looked like, Stone Cold Steve Austin wearing the crimson mask. I was like, oh, it was bad. It was bad to witness it from afar and just realize like I'm thousands of miles away. There's nothing I can do to help, and I'm watching it in real time on a video feed. It was not good.
Oh my God. That's nuts. Yeah. So that's another thing I was going to bring up. You are pretty actively touring a lot of the time, right?
Yeah.
So you have to deal with catching up with him over FaceTime calls a lot, which I know is hard. So how do you handle that? How do you handle that struggle of like knowing this is what you need to be doing for yourself, just creatively, career-wise, and also like grappling with, are there crippling feelings of guilt being away from home for large stretches at a time, or you feel like you're doing what you have to be doing?
Well, I mean, you've known me long enough to know that I'm always very honest with stuff. And it's a real struggle because I can take a step back and go, I'm 42 years old. I had my own TV show, HBO special. I've been in some shows, some movies. I'm about to publish my 5th book. I'm like, objectively, This is pretty successful. Like, I'm not a mainstream name, but I have been a working artist at a pretty healthy level for many years. But I still, the money from the road, like we need it, like it's a couple of years ago, I was doing really well. Now I'm doing solid, but we need it. It's mortgage money. It's daycare. It's preschool fees money. It's car payment money. And it sucks. It sucks for my wife. It sucks for me. I've recently realized, like, I think one of the big issues, this book I'm writing, I'm talking with a lot of my other friends who are dads, and a lot of people keep bringing up the words introverted and extroverted. And I've realized that's one of the huge things about having a kid is, like, I'm a pretty introverted guy. So to me, going to the airport is a drag. And like, I actually get kind of anxious having to go in front of crowds, even though it's what I've done my whole life. Whereas my wife is this huge extrovert. So it does create this situation where she's like, man, you get to still go on the road and live that life. She's an artist herself, musician, dancer, Broadway, off-Broadway stuff. She toured with the National Touring Company of Rent. She toured with her punk band. She's like, I would kill to go back on the road. I'm like, I kind of hate it. And meanwhile, she's home with the kid because that's just how the ball broke as far as which of us was working when he was born and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, man, it sucks. So the FaceTime calls are a drag. There was I did the Edinburgh Festival this year. That was kind of a disaster. And halfway through, there's one night on FaceTime where my son was being moody. And I was like, Cal, you got to just talk to me, man. And he said, well, I'm never going to see you again. So why? And I was just like, this sucks. And the honest answer is, I'm like, I don't know. I can't decide. Sometimes I get depressed talking about this. Sometimes I feel like it's right on target. Like, there's a part of me that for the first time in my life is going, I think I might need to just go find a job that gives me health insurance. And that's not to say that I'm going to quit creative stuff, but I don't know if the entire infrastructure of my family can rely on my creative pursuits anymore. Like, I get my health insurance through Screen Actors Guild acting jobs, and I don't act all that much. And you have to earn $26,000 a year in union jobs to get insurance for yourself and your family. That's a hefty chunk of change, you know?
Yeah.
And that's a lot of pressure. I still do well enough on my podcast and touring that we're comfortable, but if I have to start paying for insurance out of pocket, it's going to be a disaster, and it's the major source of stress in my life. So I got back from Edinburgh, and it was kind of a disaster this year. I applied to grad school. I'm going to see if I get in, and then I'm going to decide if I'm going to go after that. And I've actually been talking with a few. It ties in with career suicide because over the years, there's been a bunch of different mental health organizations that I've done work for, speaking stuff and, you know, just general support and kind of just being on each other's radar. And I was talking with some friends from one of them, and they were like, we might be able to just give you a job. And I'm like, is this like the ultimate defeat if I just go take a job to have insurance and work a 9 to 5, literally for the first time since 2002, you know? Or is it a sign that I'm growing up and there's a level of responsibility before? Plus, also, like, I'm the asshole who's always refused to move to LA, and it just makes it harder. I've managed to make it work, but like, if I want to move out to the sticks in New Jersey, it's a really good life for my kid, but I couldn't afford, we could not afford, LA is so expensive. Like, he couldn't have the life he has out there. So what am I going to do? I'm going to move to LA someday, and he's going to have a shittier life so I can be on TV. It just feels selfish and silly. So I'm really struggling with all these questions. I actually, if you want, I can check to see if I got into grad school right now. The website said, it's been at a point for like a week where it says decision made, but it keeps telling me to check back in. You want me to check and see live on the air?
Yeah. Let's get this live.
I'm going to log in to the Rutgers backend website. I haven't checked it in like 3 days.
My heart is pounding.
For over a week now, it keeps saying, come back soon for a decision. Let's see what it says. It's loading now. We're going to find out if I got into grad school. And, nope,
I
come
feel
back
like
soon. Check back soon for a decision on your application. Sorry, everybody.
Yeah?
Sorry for the tease, everybody. What do you think, that? Because you're also an artist and a dad, and I'm like right now it all goes through me. And this is not to say like I wish my wife would get a job. Like, she wants to be working, but it's also that fucked up thing of, well, we'd have to pay for so much more childcare that if you got a job, most of what you earn would just go directly into paying someone else to raise our kid. What is the point of that? So we're in this weird rock and hard place situation that all comes down to fucking health insurance.
Yeah. I'm getting health insurance now through, so my wife is a psychotherapist, and she was finishing up some classes. She went to grad school. She was getting insurance from grad school and then figured out that she could keep getting really good insurance by taking just one class a semester. And I was able to piggyback off her for a while. And then that kind of dried up to the point where like I needed to enroll in my own class, which I was like, fuck it, man. I'm an art school dropout. I'm not going to be able to handle a real college course. Like, there's no way, even if I devote all my time and energy, there's no way. And she was like, well, if you want health insurance, I was like, I don't know how badly I want health insurance. And she was like, you can't, it's irresponsible. You can't not have health insurance. That's insane. So I took this last spring. I took a creative writing class with SUNY Canton, and I was terrified, dude. I was absolutely terrified. I was like, this is going to be an embarrassment. I'm going to realize how dumb I am and incapable of having any hope of having any sort of career in the real world outside of comedy. And I was like, but I'm going to swing for the fences. I'm going to give it my best. And I did great. I got a 95 in this class. And
they give you health insurance?
Yeah. Yep.
What is this scam? How do I get in on this? I'll take a creative writing class.
Take a class, and you can take, SUNY? And you can, yeah. Yep. And I did great. I mean, I think most of the people in my class, English was a second language, so I really, I look like fucking Hemingway by comparison.
Just the master of the written word. I'll get in on this, man. I'm going to follow up with you on information on which schools offer health insurance for this. This is amazing.
Yeah.
And then just try to drag out my secondary education for literally my entire life.
Right. And I thought, well, shit, if I have to keep doing this, because I dropped out, I went to SVA for almost 2 years. I dropped out in the 11th hour of finishing my second semester my sophomore year. And I was like, I might actually get a bachelor's degree by the time I'm like 65.
Just make it last. Make it last, baby. Make it last.
Yeah. It's a slow crawl, but I'm going for it. But yeah, I'm in kind of like an opposite situation because, my wife is doing great. She's making a kid, especially these last couple of years. I mean, I joke all the time that the pandemic has been great for us because people are sadder than ever, So
right.
She's just
and
raking
all the
it
telehealth stuff opened up and became much more accepted socially and legally and all that too.
Sure, absolutely. So she's doing great, but she's also, it's an exhausting job. She has to listen to people talk about their trauma all day long, not in a comedic friend context,
Right.
And it takes its toll on her, So there's like, it's this balance of like letting her follow her career pursuits, whereas I'm still like in stay-at-home dad mode, even though my son's in school. I wake up, bring him to school in the morning. I'm with him from 2 to 6 pretty much every day. So like, yeah, being on the road is, if I can't justify it either monetarily, there's so many times that I'll come home with my road gig money and it's pennies by comparison. You know what I mean? It's like I'm just chucking a couple of crumpled up dollar bills on the table, be like, I provide too. She's like, oh, that's cute. You tried. So like, it makes more sense. I mean, what she's able to make in her career is so much more than what I'm able to make. But at the same time, like I remember talking to you on the phone. Was it like 2 years ago? Remember that? We talked on the phone for a little bit and I was kind of having a nervous breakdown. I was like, man, I don't know what to do. I felt like I was gaining steam and then pandemic shit kind of leveled me along with moving into a new apartment. And you really kind of talked me off a ledge, man, because like all the success that you've had and you said to me, you're like, yeah, I might go apply for a job at a comic book store selling Pokemon cards.
Yeah.
Remember that?
There was a gaming store in a town nearby when I moved out here. And the guy was like, if you want a job, I'll give you a job. And I was seriously considering just going and taking some hourly wages at this, it was this store that had like kids would go and play D&D in the back and they'd sell, Pokemon cards, Magic the Gathering cards. And I wound up not doing it, but it's really the whole loop of like mortgage, health insurance. It's not as fun and charming once you have a kid. Just when you have a kid and there's a real consequence that extends beyond you, where like years ago it'd be like, yeah, if I break my leg, I guess I'll just like not pay those bills and they'll send a collection agency after me and my credit will get messed up and I'll never be able to buy a house and whatever, and you think like that when you're in your 20s as an artist.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, there's a little boy here and like I feed him food and everything about his life I'm responsible for. Maybe I shouldn't have dicked around for 2 decades doing improv. Maybe I shouldn't have just done improv for 2 decades of my life. Maybe I should have built some skills that apply in the world at large. But yeah.
I hear you, dude. Being an adult is tough. It really is.
I think so. And I also think being an artist, artists like to complain and there's many people with less cushy situations. But I will say, they keep finding ways. Like now we're at a point as artists too, where it's like, oh, it used to be that it was really hard to sell a special. And then all of a sudden Netflix was buying tons of specials. And now there's so many specials that everybody's just got to put it up for free. You got to put your specials up for free now, and it's like,
Yeah.
Oh, well, it goes up for free and you get a few million views and it means you'll do better selling tickets on the road. Okay. Well, now also most of the venues are owned by Ticketmaster, and Ticketmaster and Live Nation are the same company, I believe, and they can put these arbitrary fees on all your tickets. So if you advertise a $20 ticket, the person buying it's actually going to spend $35 after all the fees and taxes, and they don't look bad. You look bad. You look like the person selling a ticket that's prohibitively expensive for, younger people or people who also need to get a babysitter. Like, you look bad. Okay, well, you're still selling lots of tickets so you can sell merch. So it's like, okay, so now we have to give away most of our work for free so we have the pleasure and honor of being t-shirt salesmen who leave our families behind so we can go sleep in shitty econo lodges on the sides of highways near the airport. Like, that's the other thing about the touring life for me right now is like, I'll have a gig in Portland, Oregon at 8 p.m. and I'm sitting here playing this really dangerous game. It used to be like, oh, my first gig's on Friday. Maybe I'll go out Wednesday night and just hang out Thursday and check out Portland. Now it's like, no, I found a flight that lands at 5 p.m. Portland time and I can get right to the gig. And then I do Friday night and Saturday night. And then, oh, cool, there's a 5:30 a.m. flight back on Sunday, and that'll get me back by 3 in the afternoon Eastern time, and I'll still be able to have dinner with my kid and put him to bed, and I'll be like a half-dead zombie around my family. That's another thing where I'm like, I fight so hard to minimize the time on the road, and it just means that the road life becomes all travel and logistics and no relaxation. Like, sleeping in a hotel is cool to like have nights where I'm not getting woken up after 3.5 years of this screaming child finding excuses to wake me up. Outside of that, though, I'm like, oh, the charm of it just wears off. It just beats the shit out of you. It beats the shit out of you.
Yeah, it does. And it's funny what you said about selling T-shirts, because that's so true, man. And I wonder if for me it's going to come full circle, because like I have this fine art background. I've always been into graphic design and drawing. I don't really do it much anymore, but I also have like, ever since I was a kid, anywhere I would go on vacation, I wouldn't get a toy, I would get a T-shirt. I've been collecting T-shirts since I was a kid. It's like, man, it's all going to come full circle. I might actually just become a full-blown T-shirt salesman, and maybe that's not the worst thing in the world. Maybe that's what I was destined to do all this time.
No shame in that. No shame in being one of these guys selling old T-shirts on eBay. No shame in that.
It's not the worst. But I'm curious, so like you said, you spent 2 decades doing improv. That's got to be, you didn't really do for 2 decades. Was it more like 15 years?
You were, I mean, because you and I met when I was an improv teacher.
Yeah, I was 23 or 4. I took 2 classes with you. And you were already kicking ass at UCB, like on, what was the team you were on? Stepfathers, right?
Stepfathers, the Friday night team, yeah. I started there.
And so,
go ahead.
I mean, like, you were kicking ass as an improviser. You were also, honestly, you were widely regarded as like the best teacher. You're the only dude I took 2 classes with. I was like, oh man, if I'm taking classes with this guy, I might stand a chance. You like really were passionate about teaching. You really kind of debunked the whole idea of those who can't teach. It was like, this guy's a killer improviser and a really, really great teacher. But I always kind of wondered, like, you were great at improv, but your stand-up is so personal and introspective and vulnerable, and improv does not really lend itself to that. You're not doing personal stuff. You're just silly make-em-ups. So, like, were you contemplating the idea of doing stand-up that whole time? Were you feeling like, God, I have so much personal stuff I want to get on stage and talk about, but that's kind of gnawing at me? Or was it kind of a revelation that you had at a certain point? How did you come to kind of moving completely into stand-up?
Well, I'd always been obsessed with stand-up as a kid. And none of us had ever heard of improv. People of my age, like, Whose Line Is It Anyway was a British, when Comedy Central started putting that on, I was like, this is very interesting. But it wasn't a thing. But for me growing up, I know, probably shouldn't name drop them, but it was like Bill Cosby, Eddie Murphy, And then Andy Kaufman and David Letterman when I found out about him, and he had a stand-up background. So I was always very stand-up obsessed as a kid. And then I had a teacher in high school who told me to take her drama class, and she made it all improv. And I was very blown away that she basically pulled me aside and was like, you're a wise ass and you keep getting in trouble for it, but I think you might actually just be talented. And she was like the only teacher I can point back to in high school who gave a shit. And then, yeah, the bullet points are like, I started doing some improv in college. There was a college group back then, which was kind of rare in the late 90s. Not every college had like 4 improv groups. And then I was a really depressed person, like dangerously so back then. And comedy was making me happy. So when the summer break came along, I didn't want to stop. And I found out about UCB. I'd never seen a show there. I didn't know what long form was. And I just signed up. I just was like, I can keep doing it, take these classes. And I signed up in the summer of 2000. This was before UCB. This was when it was legit, like the whole like CBGBs of comedy thing. Like it was an abandoned strip club. Giuliani shut down the strip club. They took over a space. And it was like the best people in the world at this all showing up, and no one had jobs. You'd see someone would get a commercial and everybody would flip out and be like, oh my God, you got a commercial. And I was just there, right place, right time. And also at an age where I was like young and dumb enough that I should have been so intimidated. I mean, like I was 21 years old. I was on a team with Rob Corddry and Jack McBrayer and just like all these killers. And I should have been intimidated. And those guys were so nice letting me just be a part of it. And then, yeah, as I grew up, it's funny because Birbiglia actually pointed out to me, because he's really been a good guy to me and mentor to me over the years. And he was like, you know what's interesting about you? He's like, for all the success UCB had, and it was really for a while there, it was just like a success factory. He's like, everyone who comes out of there is known for being an actor and for the characters they do. He's like, you're the only person who came out of UCB who's known for being yourself. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting, because it's true. Like even my friend, like Bobby Moynihan, you think Drunk Uncle, you know, like Zach Woods, you think, oh, Gabe from The Office, Silicon Valley. Like you think about the characters that UCB people play. But for me, people who know me are like, oh, that's Gethard. So I started realizing I was always a good story. I come from an Irish Catholic family, a lot of like laughing at dark stories and shit. You know, I remember my cousins, my aunts and uncles telling stories when I was a kid, and we'd all be crying, laughing. And then you'd kind of like, they'd go home and you'd be in bed at night and you're like, that story's horrifying. That's not funny at all. That's like how we're dealing with it. So that was always like a thing. But then I started realizing, and you know, you were around back then, and I think a lot of people who maybe were part of, you know, whether it was people who were into the improv scene, or back then too, there were a lot of actors and stand-ups who were like, I should take a class here because it's, you know, a skill set and a hot place. Either way, like I would play a lot of characters that were depressed, or I would play characters that were struggling with certain aspects of their personality. And I'd get off stage and I remember feeling like, oh, that's just a real thing that I have thought or I have felt that I've never figured out how to say to anybody. Years before I was in therapy, where I was expressing things where it would be like, well, this character is talking about how he's tried to hurt himself. And no one in the audience knows that the specifics of how this character tried to hurt himself is something I actually did 4 or 5 years ago. So I was I would never want to point to comedy as therapy. Certainly not improv, because it can be very cultish, and I think that's a dangerous thought. But I would realize I was kind of hiding out in my characters. So then I started a storytelling show at UCB with some of the other people who I knew could really throw down with stories. And then that led to me being invited. We would invite a lot of the Rafifi comics. Rafifi was this alt spot that was like, Eugene Merman famously ran Invite Them Up there. And that's where like Dimitri Martin and Reggie Watts, I always think of, Mulaney and Kroll, and a lot of those guys got big there. Jenny Slate. And like I started doing stand-up shows where it would be like Joe Mandy, Pete Holmes, like that generation started inviting me to do their shows. And that's how I transitioned over. But a lot of it was just because my improv was, I wasn't somebody who was like, you know, I can play the funniest like pirate you've ever seen, or like you know, people who would watch me would be like, oh, you very realistically portrayed someone who did a bunch of drugs and has deep regrets, and me being like, oh yeah, that's the character I know how to play. It's like I've never played a character in my life. I just didn't know anywhere else to talk about this shit. And then I finally kind of grew up and realized maybe I can just go talk about it. Sorry for the long rambly answer.
No, that's great. So you were playing kind of versions of yourself of this more kind of damaged version of yourself in these improv scenes.
I was kind of hiding in plain sight is what I was doing. A lot of shit that I was too scared to talk about, I'd put it out there publicly in the context of a creative situation, and hiding it in plain sight is what I was doing.
Right. Wow, that's cool. So you mentioned Birbiglia, and he's one of the ones, because I listened to your episode that you did with him on working it out, and you were touring with him for a while. He was one of the ones that really kind of encouraged you to lean into the darker shit, right? Like when you told him about your suicide attempt that you talk about in Career Suicide. Didn't he say, have you ever talked about that? You were like, no. You're like, you got to do that.
He's like, you got to talk about that. That's hilarious. I'm like, feels like the opposite of hilarious. And I legitimately told that story on stage the first time at a show he organized at Union Hall to prove him wrong. To be like, dude, this is going to go so poorly that you can stop bothering me about it now when we're out in the Midwest and I'm opening for you. And it crushed. And I was like, so mad. So mad. Because I'm like, oh, he's always right.
That's great. So you were hoping to eat shit in front of him just to shut him up.
I just wanted to get it over with so he'd stop telling me to tell everybody my darkest secrets. And then it turns out it became the most mainstream successful thing I've ever done. So fuck me. Birbiglia was right again.
That's awesome. So I want to ask you about something, and feel free. You don't have to go into detail if you don't want to. You don't have to name names. If you want to move on, you can. There was some blowback when you did Career Suicide from some other comics that did not particularly subscribe to that brand of comedy. Did that discourage you, or did that make you kind of lean in tenfold to be like, fuck it, man, this is what I do?
It fucked my whole head up. It fucked my whole head up, man. Yeah, there were a few groups. There's one podcast that's kind of known for saying mean shit about people, and then there was a former friend of mine, and then most notably, this is one people probably know about, but Shane Gillis called Judd Apatow and I some homophobic names for making an emo-sensitive special, and like he and I have hashed it out enough that I feel like he won't even mind that I say that, and I feel like that's the one everybody would know what you're talking about. It fucked my head up really bad, man. It messed my head up really bad. I'm not gonna lie. It also, for some reason, the special came out in 2017, but a lot of that shit talk happened around 2020, which was really weird to me. I think we've seen a growing scene, and dude, you know me well enough to know I've always been a guy in New York who I generally get along with everybody. I think people are usually happy to have me on shows. I kind of do my own thing, but I've always been proud of, like, I can go do the Comedy Cellar, I can go do the weirdest basement in Bushwick, I can pop over to Littlefield, and there's all these different scenes where there's not too many people that can just float from thing to thing and feel like they get respect. So I was pretty surprised, man, and it messed me up because, first of all, the pandemic happened, so I couldn't even get on stage and just be like, no, I'm good at this, you know? Like, what I do might not be obvious or traditional, but, like, you've done enough shows with me to know, like, you put me on a stage, it's rare that I walk away feeling embarrassed about how it went, you know? I certainly bomb, just like everybody does. I have nights that go worse than other nights, but generally, you put me in a room full of people with a low ceiling and a microphone, and I'm going to connect with those fucking people. And I've been doing that for 22 years. And I'm proud of that. Now, does it translate perfectly to TV, what I do? I don't know that it does, you know? Is it easy to explain? No, but I'm pretty proud of it. And I didn't have that opportunity to get back up there and do it. And then there's also some other layers to it too, where I kind of felt like there was a lot of people saying like, we need to protect free speech and comedians' rights to say stuff. And I was like, yeah, okay. But also, what about the idea that like, you don't shit talk your peers publicly? Like, that's another big thing in the stand-up world, and always has been, of like, you can talk shit in the green room of a show, or, you know, at a table at the back of a bar while you're all waiting to wrap up or waiting to go on. But this idea that you're going to publicly slam each other is a no-no. And I felt pretty abandoned, man. I felt like I was somebody who always went out of my way to be a scene guy. And anytime I've met with success, I always try to spread that success. I try to hire people I know from the local scene. I try to spread word on people who maybe do some stuff that's interesting. And I felt very alone in it. And now how real was that? I don't know. I was having some mental problems surrounding it. But then I later came to find out that there were like there's a comedy seller regular who is someone who you would think of and you would go, oh, he is not like Gethard at all. He's very respected, old school guy there who sat one of the people in question down and was like, why are you talking shit about a dude who just works hard and stays out of everybody's way? And there were a few comics like that who did step up. A few people who told me like, yeah, I'm not going to get this person's back because if they're crushing you, they have ill intentions. So yeah, the short answer is that really did fuck my head up. And, you know, I think I'm a good comic, and I think I've been doing good and interesting comedy for decades now, and it does really piss me off that some people have not just like shit on my work, but also like used it. It's almost like they used the fact that I did something sensitive and emotional as a counterpoint to prove their own toughness, you know, to like kick me as a way to be like, look, we're going to like beat up this emo nerd to prove how tough we are. And it's like, and if that's what you got to do, that's like, okay. My whole thing is this though, like if the whole thing is, and there's a lot of comics who will say things that people go, that's really troublesome that you said that. And a lot of these comics will turn around and go, well, there's an audience for it. We can sell tickets. So clearly this is part of a discourse and we have a right to go out and make that discourse happen. Don't buy a ticket if you don't want to support it. And I'll be honest, I go, I agree with that. Even if I don't agree with what you say, I agree with your right to say it. Like the ACLU rules on that, you know? My whole thing is a lot of the people who pull that card to defend what they say are the same exact people who shit all over me. And I go, what did I do except build an act that was a little different, go out, find an audience for it, sell tickets, and survive? So if the idea is that we should be able to go out there and if there's an audience for our art has a right to exist. Well, there are certain people who I've come to believe, I think you use that as a smokescreen or an excuse to get away with just saying fucked up shit because you didn't extend that courtesy to me. Just because my stuff is sensitive instead of fucked up and culturally in your face. If the idea is that creative people have a right to create and we got to box out room for each other to do that and room for each other to take chances, even if it's not always the most popular choice, my opinion is I've done that and extended that to a lot more people who maybe are proving that they don't extend it to me. And it's the hypocrisy of that really stings.
Yeah. I mean, I think that whole thing kind of struck me on two different levels. One of them being that, you know, we're in our 30s and 40s now, and the idea that there's still bullies that you have to watch out for. You know, people that are still really, just want to take you down a peg is like, really? Why is that still happening? Especially when, as a comic, you think we're all I kind of think of all comics as kind of outcasts to some degree and kind of maybe trying to reinvent ourselves in some degree or find empower ourselves through this skill set that we have to kind of make up for whatever freakishness or however we felt left out or misunderstood growing up, you know? And to know that there's still, this kind of whatever group you want to equate it to in high school, whether it be jocks or gearheads or whatever, that are just kind of like looking down their nose at you, calling you a pussy or a fag or whatever. It's like, damn, that sucks. And also, like, as I get older and by proxy of being a Jehovah's Witness and leaving that, trying to move on from that, I've had a lot of walls up in my life, been very guarded, had this tremendous need to try to protect myself, and only recently come to realize that, vulnerability, openness, honesty, that's the key to having quality relationships. That's the key to having contentment in life, and really trying to lean into that. And then knowing that there's this whole contingent of not just fans or audience members, but other comics that would be looking down on you and judging you for that, being more open and vulnerable and sharing darker things about yourself is a real bummer.
It is. And I'll also say too, since I brought up his name, like I said, we talked it out. Shane has been very apologetic to me. He also told me, like, right away, he was like, yeah, dude, like, Dan Soder told me to shut up about you. Like, and Dan's been, I think, really good to him. It was like, a few people who he was like, people made it clear that you're like a dude who has earned your stripes. And he was living in Philly at the time. He wasn't even a New York guy then. And he and I don't think he and I will ever be buddies, but we're fine. Like, I'm not trying to hang on to stuff, but I'm with you. This idea that bullying has it's almost come into vogue as like a fad in certain corners of comedy. And I don't know why the crosshairs get put on me. I think maybe I have a funny last name and I wear big glasses and I'm not famous enough that it's not like it's not going to cost you anything at this point. A few years ago, I had a TV show. It might have cost you a writing job, It doesn't cost you anything to come after me at this point. I'm in a valley, not a peak right now. So I don't know why I was the target for a lot of it. Like, they're not going to go after Birbiglia. He's too big. You know what I mean? Like, right. I'm not that big. So yeah, it was really hard. It was also funny too, though, because I've had other people who I know have said, like, there's a lot of people who all the people who talked this shit are people who came to know me through Career Suicide, because that was the biggest thing I've done. It was an HBO special, pretty big platform. And it's very funny because I've come to learn that a lot of the people who maybe spoke to them were like, oh, like, his act is really soft, but for years he was kind of known as a sort of a maniac in New York.
Yeah.
And like, what are you doing? Like, you're messing with a guy who, like, yeah, he's a real nice guy, but also, like, there's like I'm not going to say I have a school shooter vibe, but I'm going to say there's been stretches where people have seen me angry in the scene, or who have heard about, like you said, like, I've always had the ambulance thing where, like, oh, haha, you've always done crazy shit. It's like, yeah, no, I had a reputation for years of being kind of an unhinged guy, and I got it together. And there were, that always made me laugh too, of a lot of the people who knew me before any success were like, don't fuck with him. He's like both nice and kind of crazy. Why are you fucking with that guy? And then that was a whole thing. But anyway, yeah, it was weird. It was weird to open myself up to it. And you know what, the ego side of it stings. The questioning of myself stings. The fact that it happened during the pandemic, when it started, it felt very magnified as like, oh shit, does everyone think this about me? Are all the comics in New York sitting around saying this stuff about me and I haven't known it? I'm sure some have, some haven't. The thing that really sucks, though, is that special came out in 2017, and when I tell you that I've gotten thousands of messages from people saying it meant something to them, I'm not exaggerating. Thousands. Whether that's in-person conversations, whether that's DMs on social media, whether that's people tracking down my email, thousands of people telling me I saw a therapist for the first time after I saw it. Or, I mean, dude, I once talked to a woman in Chicago, I'll never forget, we did a Q&A after a show, and she said, my brother killed himself, and I've never understood what he could be thinking, and I've always been mad at him. And I just watched your show, and I kind of feel like I have a little more sense of what he might have been thinking, and I'm not as mad at him anymore. I'm like, oh my God, you know?
Wow.
The thing that's really a bummer is having your peers go into attack mode on you. It made me question myself in a way where I can point to 3 people who have publicly shamed me for going there. And those 3 people, the level of hurt that caused, or the level that messed my head up, came to equal or outweigh thousands of people telling me it helped them. Because those are messages in that weird inbox on Instagram that you have to kind of go check if anything's in there, because like that hidden messages thing.
Yeah.
And it's easy to discount that, and it's easy to say, well, I've heard this 500 times before. Why is this person calling me a homophobic name for a thing I did 3-4 years ago? And this is one of my peers who like sits at the same tables I sit at. There's one of the people from that podcast where I texted, dude, like one guy from one of this podcast, I found out these guys were talking on their podcast, and I texted, I go, hey dude, I have your number. We've eaten meals together. We've broken bread together. You had every chance in the world to tell me that you guys have done this, and you chose not to. I don't respect it. It's cowardly, you know? So that's the thing that's a bummer, is I allowed that to have an outsized influence and outweigh the fact that I've tried to be positive and do some good in the world. And that sucked. That sucked that happened, and it sucked of me to lose sight of what was more important.
Yeah. Well, I feel like, unfortunately, that whole thing going down kind of gave me pause in a way in my own endeavors, because I'm coming up on 14 years of stand-up in January, and you get to a point. I imagine you probably agree, because just by proxy of what I've seen you really lean into, you get to a point where it's like, all right, I know how to write a joke. I know how to take most any topic and find the funny in it and explore that and find the joke. Am I just going to be doing that the rest of my life? I got to kind of make this more challenging for myself in a way. I need to kind of be me a little bit more and lean into more personal stuff. So when I started, I'm still working on this show about my years as a Jehovah's Witness, it was very daunting, to think about, reflecting on 20 years of your life and trying to condense that into an hour, and really having a lot of doubt and being like, I don't know if I can do this. And then I started talking about it as a guest on various podcasts, and same thing, the amount of messages that I got from people that were like, oh my God, thank you for shedding some light on this. I've seen this destroy families. My family doesn't talk to me anymore. I'm thinking of leaving, but I don't want to get completely excommunicated. I don't want to be cut out from my friends and family. This is my community. I don't know how to go about leaving. It was like this outpouring of support and thank yous, and people asking me for genuine advice. It was like, wow, this is not about me anymore. This is about something big, much bigger than me. And even if I find some discomfort and it's hard to talk about a lot of this stuff and find the funny in it, I'm doing people a service, much like you are, and it's an amazing skill set to be able to take something heavy like that and find the funny in it. And there's nothing wrong with having more somber, poignant, introspective moments. Why does stand-up have to be like a speed bag of laughs all the time? You know what I mean? Like, it's gonna change and evolve over time. It's gonna take different forms. If it stays the same thing for decade after decade, I mean, that's boring, And these guys, I'm sure they have legions of fans. They got people reaching out to them, telling them how great they are. But to have people reaching out to you, telling you that you've really genuinely helped them, that's an amazing feeling, And
it is.
And it seems like for you, for sure, I can tell. And for me too, it really makes me just kind of want to lean into that of just kind of like, all right, this is bigger than me. I can help people. I can offer people encouragement and support. I owe that to them.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. And like I said, I am of the opinion out here of like the more art, the better. The more artists making cool shit, the better. The more artists making a living off their art, the better. And if that means that you're somebody who writes, you know, you can do a set where there's one punchline every 33 seconds, just like those old TV show bookers wanted, and you can do that at a high level, more power to you. Go do it. If you can tell an interesting 15-minute long story that maybe only has three identifiable punchlines, but those three identifiable punchlines blow my mind, more power to you. If you're someone who wants to, you know, like I think I look at like Gary Goldman's special that he just did, and I'm like, it's amazing. You know, he's talking about how he went through electroshock therapy, but we all also know Gary's the guy who went on Conan and did the "how did they give the states abbreviations" joke. You know what I mean? He can also do that. Both. Nobody's gonna question that. You know, I look at that in the same way that I go, I love watching him do that special, the same way that I love watching Jessica Kirsten put up a video on her Instagram of her just completely abandoning her set and talking to the crowd. You know, I love Roy Wood Jr., who can tell a million jokes but also tell a big giant story, and maybe he'll do a set where that whole set is just one story. I love that. I also really love watching Rich Voss. I've really come to love who people might go, wait, what? You and Voss? Like, he's like a tough crowd guy. Yeah, but what he does is a really honest, true version of what he does. I think ultimately everybody should be out there trying to get really, really good at what they know their medium of art to be. And then you need to figure out how to put your own stamp on it. I think it's a little sad, and I'm not someone who talks shit about my peers, and I'm not going to name names, and I'm not referring to anybody specific here. But I think there's a little bit of a romance right now where there's a lot of people who feel like, A, there's room to grab money now just by being fucked up and then saying everyone's trying to cancel me. It's like, that's officially a scheme. There's people who make more money than they've ever made in their lives by claiming they got canceled. It's like, it seems to me you got amplified. You didn't get canceled. You got magnified by making your whole shtick. And there's a few people out there where I go, that's pretty sinister. That's pretty slick. You're finally, I've known you for years and you've never been great, and now you're making tons of money because you're saying that you got canceled. I don't see it, but more power to you. Go make your money while you can, you know? And the thing artistically that just bums me out is I think there's people out there right now who feel like the best thing they could possibly be, the thing to aspire to, is to be like a photocopy of Patrice O'Neal. And I think Patrice O'Neal did some brilliant stuff. I'm not an idiot, you know? I was around seeing shit he was pulling when I was still an improv kid and going like, oh my God, he's saying this, he's getting away. I loved Tough Crowd with Colin Quinn. Back when it was on, I loved it. But you want to be a photocopy of a photocopy? That's to you what quote unquote real comedy is. Anybody who uses the phrase real comedy, I feel like you talk to a lot of the people that get put on most on a pedestal by the people who say real comedy, and they'll be the first ones to tell you real comedy is whatever sells tickets and pays your rent. They'll tell you that.
Yeah.
And a lot of the people I look up to as people who were the people, there's people who, when I started 22 years ago, they were already people I admired, and they're still going today. And I would say to a human down the line, those people, when you ask them, they don't care about any of this shit. What's real comedy? What's not, you know? There's like whole swaths of people that I think put Colin Quinn on the biggest pedestal. I go, Colin Quinn writes shows that are these layered, brilliant shows about the history of immigration in New York, about the way that the United States Constitution is this intricate living document. He's one of the most smart, thoughtful fucking people I've ever been around. And also, He can fix your fucking joke. Dude, when I was doing Career Suicide, I was having trouble with a really touchy part of the show, and he called me on the phone. I'd never spoken to him on the phone before. I get a phone call from a 212 number. I pick it up. Say, Gethard, it's Colin Quinn. I hear we got to fix that joke. Let's get to work. I'm like, you're just like Joke Yoda. Barely. I've met this guy maybe twice, and it's like, a lot of the people who set the bar for what some of the bullies are chasing, they don't give a shit about any of this stuff. And they want to see the coolest, most interesting art and the coolest, most interesting advancements in the form and the people taking the biggest chances try to do it the right way. Now, I'm not saying that I've innovated the art or I've taken the biggest chances, but I'm saying I had to take a step back and stop allowing my feelings to be hurt by people who were talking shit about what I did. Because from my days as a teacher, part of why people liked me as a teacher was because I think I was one of the people that would go, stop worrying about getting on a fucking house team at UCB. Stop worrying about trying to emulate other stuff you've seen. Can we figure out how to use your time on stage for you to become the best version of whatever is inside you? That was always kind of my approach and that was true in improv, and I think that's true in my stand-up as well. Is it's this quest to just be like, who are you? What do you have to say? What's the perspective you have that no one else has? Can you get to a point of confidence and skill where you can find the best platform and the best way to get that unique perspective out there at its most hard-hitting, at its most amplified, at its most captivating, and most importantly, to a degree that is going to slice through to the guts of any audience member everywhere? Like, can you put on the show? Can you write the material where someone who's a current Jehovah's Witness is going to identify with it, where someone who's a former Jehovah's Witness is going to identify with it, to somebody who only knows the Jehovah's Witnesses as the people who came through twice a year and knocked on their doors and everybody turned the lights out? Can you get them to laugh at it? Can you get the people who go, oh, I've heard of that, but I've never met a Jehovah's Witness, to understand and laugh? Can you make whatever you went through and whatever you lived through universal, where everyone will hear a joke about it and laugh or think or stop in their tracks, or some combination of those three? If only you can do that, why the fuck would we sit around worried about, is it real comedy? Who gives a shit, man? There's a lot of comics who can go on the road, who can write 200 jokes a year, which I could never. But when you watch them, you go, a lot of your jokes aren't really about anything because you spend all your time doing sets. And I'm not mad at you about that, and I'm not criticizing you about it, but that's your thing. Don't talk shit about my thing. We're trying to do two different things here. But if we're really gonna say that all artists need to get each other's backs, I got your back. Don't call me a homophobic name for doing what I do. If I got to get your back, you got to get my back too, even if it doesn't fit your vision of what it is. Why the fuck would we just go, okay, yeah, another person who can tell good jokes but has now been made too nervous because of scene politics and perception to tell the story that only they can tell? That's a shame. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna turn on this thing.
I know, you're officially on call now.
I'm officially on call now, so if this goes off, I will have to run from this point forward. But I'm happy to talk until it does. Usually it doesn't, knock on wood.
Whoever's dying in North Jersey right now, just, hang
Take
on
a deep
little
breath.
longer.
Take a couple deep breaths.
Okay.
Chill out. Let me get this out there, because now we're getting to the real deal shit.
I was talking to Anthony DeVito last week, and I talked to Ari Shafir yesterday, and Anthony was talking about his Edinburgh experience.
Yeah.
And talking, and I was talking to Ari about us on a similar wavelength about, there is kind of this movement now where things kind of have maybe swung in the other direction, where it was, years ago there was a real formula to stand up, joke, set up, punch, joke, keep the jokes coming. Now there is kind of this movement where people are leaning more into solo show territory, taking one topic or theme and kind of leaning into that. And I think it's wonderful. And there's a fine line. It's not just going up there and, just vomiting out all the worst, most traumatic things that have happened to you, because that just bums everybody out. You know, there is still an art form to it. You can still take that skill set of being a comedian, writing jokes, and moving people, but still making them laugh at the same time. You know what I mean? It's not just getting up there and this happened to me, and you know, it's not just you don't want it to be just a straight up sob fest, you know? But there is absolutely room for being real and truthful and you know, finding the funny along the way, you know? There's nothing wrong with that.
For me, with career suicide, I knew I was like, it's not going to have as many funny parts as a usual set. If I'm doing a 15-minute set at a club or an alt show, you know, alt shows take my time a little bit more, but you still need some laughs. I go, okay, this is going to have some legitimately sad stuff in it. Maybe some stuff that, especially back then, felt a little kind of disturbing. I think even in the 5 years since it came out, the special's a little obsolete now because it got all this press about how shocking it was for a guy to be talking about mental health. I think that's less of an issue in society now. That's a good thing. But I was like, if it's going to have this stuff that feels sad or the stuff that's going to feel disturbing, I've got to then make sure that the funny parts are as funny as the sad parts are sad and the disturbing parts are disturbing. And I've got to make sure that the funny parts are as or more funny than stuff I would be doing in a club set. Knowing my special, I think, was 80-something minutes. I'm like, all right, and there's a lot less laughs per minute than I could do if I went up at a club. Can I get those laughs even more intermittently? I got to make sure they're as pure, or else I'm just exploiting my own mental struggles for career gain. You know, so that was kind of the standard I set for myself, was like, the pacing of it is not going to be stand-up. The non-laugh parts are going to be really weird within the context of stand-up. But can I make sure that the funny parts reach a bar that I've set for myself as a stand-up along the way? And I think there's a few things in there, particularly this one story about me getting drunk and blacking out, where I go, I could tell that on any stage in America, and they'd go, fucking A, that was a killer closer. And because I had that story in the special, I felt very comfortable of saying, like, I don't think I'm doing this for the wrong reasons, right? And this was all back in 2015, 2014 that I was first working on the show. Now we also live in a world where everybody saw how huge Nanette got, and we all know there's a lot of people just chasing that. And I do think there's some pushback of you just got to hold yourself to your usual standard and define what that usual standard is. And if you're holding yourself to your usual standards, while knowing that the context of this is different than what you usually do, then I think you have every right to just go out there and go into attack mode and make it happen.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up Nanette, because I feel like that really kind of magnified this blowback against what is and what isn't real comedy, you know?
Well, she got the most blowback of all.
Sure, yeah.
She got shitted on the most by comedians, and I go, yeah, but
she really did.
And I'm like, there's people who have points, but I go, those feel to me like points that should be said, like I said, at the table at the Comedy Cellar or in the green room after a bar show. I'm of the opinion of whatever I thought about Nanette as a special, I got Hannah Gadsby's back for making it, in the same way that some of these bullies who shit on me, I still have their back for what they want to make.
Yeah.
They really want to go there?
Yeah.
I got your back. I also got Hannah Gadsby's back, because if I don't, I'm a fucking hypocrite. And you are too, dickhead.
Amen. Yeah, I know, man. It's there's room for everybody. There's an audience for everything. And yeah, like you said, if you got a problem with something, and nobody's saying you have to like everything that every other comic does. But, you know, one of the things that I love about stand-up is it does largely feel like a community. You know, it does feel like we're supportive. We you know, there may be some jealousy here and there, but we support each other's victories. You know, when one of us quote unquote makes it, I mean, I feel like it can be kind of a win for everybody in a lot of ways, you know?
Yeah. And I'll say that about the New York scene too, is having done it now for over 2 decades, been a part of the New York comedy scene, starting at UCB, phasing out of UCB around 2012, and then always being regarded as a UCB guy as UCB became to be regarded as like a more and more divisive and toxic place in the comedy community, which is very weird. I'm like, I've seen all these waves. I've seen Rafifi come and then flame out. I've seen the alt scene transform 4 or 5 different times. And I go, there's been a few phases where a lot of people got to pay their rent through this. And one of the things that coincides with is it's also the stretches where we all just stop talking shit about each other and embrace the fact of, listen, stand-ups are going to make fun of improv from now until the end of time. But if UCB is shining a huge spotlight on the idea that New York is this hub for comedy, that helps every comic in New York. So let's take a deep breath. Right? Like if Rafifi blows up and you want to make fun of it because you want to be like, oh, it's like, is it real comedy to have Reggie Watts down there doing songs and Dimitri Martin has his fucking whiteboard and he's drawing pictures on it? It's like, hey, do you know how many Comedy Central executives were out at comedy shows scouting that shit? Everyone benefits. There's more agents, more managers, more development people out looking at everything. Same thing on the club side. When the club side goes through big booms, that helps everybody. And when we start to buy into this fucking idea that everybody needs to whip up their individual fan bases and turn them on each other, all that means is you've now drawn a line where your people buy less tickets for me, my people buy less tickets for you, and we do not have a Venn diagram that crosses over, and that is ultimately a bad thing, not a good thing for everybody.
Right. Yeah. And, you know, I'm glad what you brought up about, you know, doing the ambulance thing and your son being able to reflect on that and be like, wow, my dad was a volunteer ambulance driver. Like, that's really cool. And you do have to think about it. You do have to think about that legacy that you leave all around, not just career-wise, you know. And I think about, you know, being able to help people that are, like you said, either current Jehovah's Witnesses, former Jehovah's Witnesses, anybody in any sort of extremist religious group who's looking for an out, who's, you know, faced all this oppression and brainwashing, and they finally open their eyes and see that there's another world out there. And kind of leaning, you know, like I was thinking about your, I was going to say your last book. I don't know how many books you've written since then, because you're seriously prolific dude. But your Dad on Pills book.
That was the last one, yes.
Is it Scribd is the platform?
I believe it's pronounced Scribd. It's a,
is it Scribd?
It's like an Audible. It's like in the same realm as that type of thing. I'm proud of that book, though. Good book.
It was great.
Thanks, man.
I got super choked up when I got to the passage about you packing up a bag to admit yourself into a psychiatric ward and saying goodbye to your son in the yard. Not knowing when you were knowing that you were gonna see him again, but not knowing when exactly, and him not being aware of what was happening and what you were going through at that moment and why you were saying goodbye. And, you know, it's great that your son, and hopefully mine as well, is going to grow up thinking of you, having a whole different definition of what a man is and what masculinity is than I certainly had of my dad, and I imagine probably yours too. My dad was never in therapy. He never talked about his feelings. He went down to the basement and cleaned his guns for 3 hours a day, you know? His therapy was going to the target range every Wednesday from 12 to 2, you know? And And it's amazing to think that how just humans have evolved in such a short period of time, where there is more awareness of mental health and being open about what you're experiencing and what you're feeling, and not just pushing it all down, not thinking medication is for pussies and it's going to erase your creativity, you know?
Yeah, I mean, we were all raised by these guys who were born like when the Cold War was getting off the ground, and everything was like there's good and bad guys and we have to win, and we beat the shit out of the Nazis and we'll kick the shit out of the Russians too, and Americans are tough. And you know, so many people of my dad's generation, where I go, like my dad, he'll be the first to tell you he was a workaholic to an extreme degree. And I sit there and I go, oh man, you probably could have just talked to somebody, and whatever you were trying to prove by all your work accomplishments, you might have been able to just like have a little bit more time back in your week, chill out on that. There's so many people of that generation. My dad was not a drinker, I'm lucky to say that, but I certainly had friends in my neighborhood growing up where it's like, oh, if our dads had therapy, there just would have been less alcoholics. That was just a cooler way to go try to beat up on your problems. And I feel like we are dads right now in an era that's like, so much good, so many ways that I will never be the equal to my father. So many ways that I see how he sacrificed and stepped up, where I just go, I don't know how you did it. And then other ways where I think he'd be the first to go like, yeah, if you want to just if you want to adjust the dials on your ability to show emotion in front of your son, that would be a good thing. If you want to figure out ways to prioritize more home time instead of time at work, that would be a good thing. I think my dad would be the first to tell me that, although because he is of his generation, we'll never actually have those conversations. I assume he would say that. I'll never know because we're never talking about this shit.
Right. Yeah, same here. But also just getting to a place where you can accept that, you know? Like my dad is 91. He's going to be 92 in June. And, you know, I've gone through many bouts of resentment, wishing that he was more open, more expressive. And then you just get to a place where it's like, okay, he's not going to change at this point. So I can fight that tooth and nail and just be miserable about it. Or I can just, you know, accept that he's a product of his environment, his upbringing, that, you know, these generational things that contribute to that, and feel grateful that I don't have to go about my life in the same way, you know, just pushing things down and in denial of the reality of how you feel about things.
I wonder if you had the same experience I had too, which was when my son was born. I've had some major moments the past 3.5 years of going, oh, it sucks that we aren't built to talk about certain things, but now I have a kid and I understand. I can think back to stuff from my childhood and go, oh, you weren't mad, you were scared. But men of your generation weren't allowed to admit they were scared. But now I have a kid and I'm scared shitless of certain things. You were fucking scared. But you didn't want me to know you were scared, and you weren't great at admitting when you were scared. That's not, your generation was trained to never show fear. I get it now. Right. I get it. Like, I've had a lot of moments like that where I go, oh, like my dad, I remember one of the first times my dad visited us after our son was born, he was rolling around on the floor making these cooing noises at my son. I was just like, who the fuck are you? Who's this guy rolling around on the ground making funny faces? And I remember my dad just kind of very succinctly just being like, yep, none of the pressure's on me now. Like, you got to pay the bills. Pressure isn't on me to keep the kid alive. You keep the kid alive and I'll play with the kid now. And I was like, whoa. Like, first of all, explains a lot. You were stressed. I thought you were just mad. Second of all, I think guys like me and you and guys of our age are like, I want my son to see me roll around on the ground. I don't want him to have a child at the age of 39 before he sees that that's in me. I want him to know that's in me. It's good and healthy and positive for him to see me soft and vulnerable at times.
Sure.
It's a weird setup they handed us. They did good. They did their best. They handed us some bullshit too.
Yeah, same with my dad. My son has an idea of my dad as just this sweet kind of doting old man who still, it's still can be a little bit hard for him to connect, but he really is trying, and it's all positive. He has no idea of this side of my dad that I grew up with. Just if I close my eyes and picture my dad as a kid, it's just gritting teeth, bulging neck vein, just God damn it. That's like, it's like if he was a pull string doll, it would be God damn it, just over and over and over again. Inanimate objects mostly. Sometimes it may, and honestly, looking back on it now, just hilarious phrases, like, oh God, you got your head so far up your ass, you could fuck up a wet dream, saying shit like that, which is like, that's pretty fucking funny.
It's like,
but
why
it's also
you're
a horrible
comedian
thing to say to your kid.
Hearing stuff like that has to be directly why you are a comedian.
Yeah.
It's like, my father is ridiculous, and I want to say things that funny while pointing out the ridiculousness of it.
Yeah. And I remember even laughing at that as a kid, knowing like, okay, this is certainly not good parenting, but seeing a man completely unhinged to this degree is pretty objectively hilarious.
Yeah.
But I also have to catch myself from being like, I love that my son has that vision of my dad as like this sweet, harmless old man. You know what I mean? And I have to catch myself constantly being like, that's not how he was with me. Like, why do you get this different version of him?
I think a lot too about how like I really broke my dad's heart once, because he was like once saying to me pretty recently, within the past couple of years, he's like, I feel like you and I got to a point where we were able to like really talk. And I was like, yeah, when you guys moved out of the house in Fairfield, which is this town in Jersey they lived in for a while, I was like, I remember moving with you. And that was when I realized, I can like let my guard down around my dad now. And he stopped in his tracks. He's like, you were like 28 or 29. And I was like, yeah. He's like, you didn't feel like you could let your guard around me until you were almost 30? It was like, if I'm being honest, yeah, like we were like moving it was just me and him moving air conditioners and couches and shit. And then he took me out to dinner, and he was like dropping some S-bombs and some F-bombs. My mom wasn't there. We had like some good heart-to-heart stuff. I was like, yeah, I remember that conversation. He took me to a Charlie Brown steakhouse. I was like, that conversation was when I felt like, I fully let my guard down around you. And he was so sad. But then there's also a part of me that's like, I have so many great memories growing up with my dad. He was like a really, really good dad. But like, a lot of my memories are, he's tired, don't make noise. He's been working too hard, don't cause any drama. And also, one thing that was very unfair to my father was my mom made him the boogeyman a little bit. It was a lot of when your father gets home, gets home.
Yeah.
So I look back now, I realized there were a lot of times my dad just wanted to come home and eat some fucking food and watch TV. And he'd walk into a house with two kids who were terrified that he was about to lose it because he'd been made into a weapon. And that wasn't on him. But I'm like, yeah, you guys made a lot of choices about your priorities and your actions, and unfortunately, it wasn't until my mid-20s that I was like, don't piss this guy off. My dad never hit me or anything like that. I just was always acutely aware. The guy works too hard. He's tired. And when he gets mad, he gets mad. Walk on eggshells a little bit. And I'm hoping that when my son is 12, 13, 14 years old, when some of those conversations start to go on in your weird boy brain, I'm hoping we can get, I'm like, I got there when I was like 28 or 29. Can I get there with my son by the time he's 13 or 14? I think that would be like a realistic goal and a good improvement. Of like, dude, you can just tell me what's going on in your life and I'm not going to fucking be pissed.
Right. Yeah. No, it's nice to have an opportunity to be open to your kid, not be the enforcer. My dad was the enforcer too,
Yeah.
Like I remember one time in the car, I was back talking to my mom about something. My dad was driving, mom in the passenger seat, I'm in the back, maybe 8 or 9. And I'm just giving my mom a hard time, and she elbows my dad. She's like, honey, will you help me out? And he's in his own world, completely oblivious as to our exchange. And he turns around and he just goes, put your seatbelt on, goddammit. She's like, he has his seatbelt on. He was just so used to.
Yeah.
It was like these different buttons that were programmed into him. Like, which one do I activate now?
That is good. That is good.
Yeah. And,
I remember I
and
told my
it's-
mom, we were in the car once and I told my mom to shut up. My mom was riding me on something. I was like, will you just shut up? And it was like the brakes got hit and I thought I was going to get tossed into the fucking woods we were driving next to. My dad was so mad. I was like, my dad, he doesn't even realize, he'll be like, I love you and your brother, but he's actually never said that. He's never said love. He'll be like, you know, I look out for you and your brother, but like my real job is to take care of your mom. It's always take care.
Yeah.
It's not love. It's take care. I'm like, you've been telling me that since I was like 9. Like maybe you could at some point stop telling me that you view your job as to take care of my mom and my mom's job is to take care of us. Like, and then you wonder why I didn't feel totally connected to you until my mid-20s, you know? Like you were telling me that you really cared about my
Your
mom.
second banana.
Yeah. And I get it. I get what he's saying.
You're my son once removed.
He's like laying out, there is a structure to this family. Here's how it works. So don't fuck around with your mom because she's my priority. It's hard as a teenage boy to not just hear, you are not the priority. Like that's what you hear a little bit. And that's not what he meant, but it's what I heard.
Yeah.
He's a baby boy weirdo. So your dad was older.
Not even boomer. Depression era.
Greatest generation.
So yeah, he I always felt like it's such a cop out to say, he did the best he could, but I have these memories of him being so angry, and my mom had this book on his bedside table called "Don't Sweat the Small Stuff." Do you remember that? It was like a big self-help book in the early 90s.
I've never read it, but I'm aware it existed.
She would use that all the time. Anytime he would get upset, don't sweat the small stuff, and it just drove him to insanity even more. But even though I have all these memories of him just impatience and anger and frustration and just being put upon and overwhelmed, we had a birthday party for him a couple years ago, and there was a slideshow, and I have 3 siblings, and I watched this slideshow, and I was like, oh my God, I am the favorite, hands down. All these pictures of him and me doing all this, sledding, shooting hoops, I was like, all right, I gotta take that into consideration too. He really went above and beyond to spend as much time with me as he could. And old too. He was 52 when I was born.
Damn.
I'm not even 40. I have 1 kid. I'm exhausted all the time.
Yeah.
He was out in the yard throwing a football with me in his 60s, already having 3 like adult kids.
Yeah.
And I would get impatient with him because he, 10 minutes in, he'd be like, fuck, my arthritis. I got to go inside. And I'd be like, come on, man. But like the fact that he even made it that far in terms of his attempts to, have these father-son bonding activities.
Yeah, it's kind of a miracle.
And our sons are gonna find ways, we're gonna be lacking in a myriad of ways compared to the way that they grow up to become fathers and men, you know what I mean? We're going to be looked back on as being behind or not as advanced or not as open and vulnerable.
My son might be calling me a pussy just like the New York comedy scene for a stretch of 2019 and 2020.
Yeah. Your son and Shane Gillis are going to start a podcast together.
Oh my God. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
And let me be clear again before his fans get mad. Shane and I have talked it out. We're good. We're never going to be best friends, but we're good. So please don't tweet at me because I don't care.
I'm also not trying to take shots at anybody. I just, the whole, and I don't want to be as simple-minded as to say, can't we all just get along? But, I do feel like as comics, we do have a duty to kind of support each other and have each other's back. And if you don't like something that somebody's doing, that's fine. Just, keep it to yourself.
And
that's all good.
Also,
nobody's a threat.
And like I said too, it's not good for anybody for the comedy scene to start tearing itself apart because we all want to be, selling tickets. We all want to be making our living at this. Let's not make it harder for each other. The more of us that are surviving and thriving, the healthier the whole ecosystem is. So it's also just not good business at the end of the day. All the shit talk and tearing each other down from the inside. To me, all that's going to do is make it for people who are out there who are like, I'm choosing between a comedy show or do I want to go see a band tonight in my city? They're going to go, comedians, it's endless fucking drama. I'm going to go see a band. Like, who wants to put up with this, like, drama-filled world? Like, it has a shelf life that goes away. So it's just bad business. It's just bad business, you know?
Yeah. We need the comedy scene to stay afloat so that you don't have to work at a comic book store and I don't have to go back to dog walking.
Indeed.
Well, thanks, man. I really appreciate you doing this.
Dude, thanks for having me. Always.
It's always a pleasure talking to you.
Always.
And do you want to just let people know where they can find you?
Yeah, chrisgeth.com, Chris Geth on Instagram, Chris Gethard on Twitter. I'm out on the road pretty frequently, so chrisgeth.com if you want to check if I'm coming to your city soon. And then still got the Beautiful Anonymous podcast going strong. Got a lot of good stuff. New Jersey is the World podcast, all sorts of stuff.
Awesome. Well, keep your head up, man. You're doing great things.
You too, man.
I didn't even get to talk about Beautiful Anonymous, which is awesome in and of itself.
Thanks,
if you get a chance to check that out.
I can't wait to see the show. Can't wait to see you.
Thanks, dude.
Throw down with the whole thing someday soon.
There you have it, folks. Chris Gethard. Give him a follow at Chris Geth on Instagram. I believe Twitter as well. I don't know. Twitter doesn't fucking matter anymore. It's a sinking ship. Instagram's the way of the future. Maybe not. I don't know. I hope they all crash and burn, to tell you the truth. But give him a follow. Check out his specials. Career Suicide is on HBO. Half My Life on Amazon Prime. Check out all his books. He's a prolific man. He's a comedy machine. His podcast, Beautiful Anonymous. Got a lot of shit going on, that guy. Busy dude. But anyway, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Give Gethard a follow. Give me a follow at Who Doug Smith. YouTube, Doug Smith Comedy. And look forward to many more episodes. Tell your friends. Remember the goal here. I want the witnesses to come after me over illegal use of this song. I want them to take me for all I'm worth. That's how I know we have become a success. So thank you so much for tuning in. Spread the word. Tune in next week. And I'll see you then. Goodbye.